Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cyber Inspiration Podcast. My name is Evgeny. I have been around cybersecurity for the last 20 years and I have a lot of experience working with a variety of cybersecurity vendors. My main work is vendor consulting and cybersecurity advisory for companies. As part of my passion in technology and cyber, I've been intrigued to learn how a company starts. I started the podcast to understand the thinking process and what motivated people to start their own company. This podcast is affiliated with Security Architecture Podcast.
We have David here to talk about his inspiration to start his company and his journey. David, can you please tell me about yourself and the company?
Yes, hi, Evgeny. It's very nice to connect with you here. And I'm David Redekop, founder and CEO of ADAMnetworks. And we focus in the area of zero trust connectivity, which is all about egress control that sits somewhere between the endpoint and the internet, with the assumption that it's only a matter of time before there is an infection or a link or something. And that's the point at which we can disrupt the attack chain. So that's what we do.
It's actually a very important part. By trade, solution architect. So design networks and design segmentation was long part of my life, even before we start calling them zero trust. And my background is actually Navy. I spent 5 years in the Navy working on submarines, different ships, and you name it, whatever floating in Israel Navy. And probably common knowledge that in the ship, you have different parts of the ship, and every part of the ship is actually closed door. You not just close the door like at home, you have to lock it. Why? Because they envisioned at one point, unfortunately, we hope not, something may happen and we need to close a compartment. So what you guys doing is very similar, but in a different stage of the environment. So great. This particular podcast and episode is not about going deep in technology, is more about understanding your inspiration to start the company. So what happened several years ago that you have the aha moment, this is what I want to do?
It goes back at least 10 years. My wife and I are blessed to have 5 sons. And in the early days of my current 20-year-old, when he was just about to turn 10, and we had avoided the utilization of digital technology because my wife was very good at putting the brakes on and saying, you know what, if we have been studying from books and from historic sources for thousands of years, I think we can do that for one more generation. And I was the one that was more focused on adopting technology, to maximize our consumption of information, right? Because it's one thing to have wisdom, but in order to get to wisdom, you need the knowledge first and to apply it. And then wisdom is a byproduct. I'm probably generalizing way too much, but the idea then was, okay, let's get online. And so we get home one day from visiting a chicken farm, and he wanted to look at some pictures of the sea of yellow that he had seen. So we go onto a search engine and we type in baby chicks. And so some of these were not the chicks that we were looking for. And so we were like, you know what? This internet thing, we're going to have to be just very wise about how we go about this. And one approach to take it is the ultra conservative approach, which is to say no internet at all. And the other one is to say, let's just extract the good out of it. And then as I went down the latter path, what became very clear to me was that no matter which solution we went with, it was complicated and always left gaping holes in it. It's like most solutions were, I likened to a white picket fence that is there for those that can see it, but it's also very easy to overstep it. And so just like you would have teenagers that would try to break out of rules, you would also have malicious actors breaking out of networks with relative ease. And so the inspiration was literally, wait a minute, if we solve this for anti-circumvention of a teenager, then we can also solve this for the malware actor that sits inside a network. And so that's when we went down this path.
A very amazing story. I like the way you describe it as well. Storytelling is quite important. So what happened after? Did you raise money? Did you hire people? Did you decided to have any technology?
The obvious answer to me, as we were exploring with different methods, whether it was an agent that would install on the desktop, whether it was something that would sit on a security gateway, whether we were doing deep packet inspection using a proxy, it all seemed to boil down to needing to go closer to the first building blocks. And so the DNS filtering approach seemed to cover the widest swath of what needed to be addressed. And we see this today because I don't know of any enterprise that isn't using DNS filtering of some kind. But what we noticed was that each time we took a step, there was a problem. So first of all, we recognized to do this properly, we needed to find a way to apply a different policy to a domain controller than we would to a Windows endpoint that is operated by a staff member, right? And so everything out there in terms of DNS servers is designed around one size fits all. As you start hacking it with separate instances, separate zones, and then you're still dealing with a very cumbersome way of delivering different policies to different devices. And so that's when we realized the only way to really do this well is to write our own. And writing your own resolver is not for the faint of heart. When even companies like Google don't write their own, but they just buy DNS mask and then customize it for Android. That was the one particular decision that at the time we went completely against the grain. All of the advice, consultative suggestions were don't write your own, use what's already there and then modify it. Fortunately, we made the right decision and we said, no, we're going to write our own. And we're going to do it in C++, and we're going to write it so that it's highly optimized so it can run on multiple architectures. I don't know how long MIPS will be around, but we'll certainly have Intel and ARM and who knows what else, what other future architecture to support. So let's do it so that we choose the right foundation. We very often refer to as building from first principles. So our approach at that time, when we realized that doing this would actually have global applications and global implications over time. So it was worthwhile doing it right. And so
Did
that
you
was what we
actually
did next.
raise money during this time, or you hired people, or you did it guys by yourself?
At the time, we did not raise money for this, but we bootstrapped it and operated on a shoestring budget. And the IT company that I co-founded back in 1995 with John Harbranko is Nerds On Site. And so for a short period of time, Nerds On Site bootstrapped, and that loan was completely repaid. So ADAMnetworks is independent, but very grateful that we were able to get started without raising external funds.
Nice. What about hiring people? How did you decide which people to hire? And did you have an vision of company culture when you were hiring and starting people?
I'm really glad you're asking the tough questions, Evgeny. You wouldn't be reading a book if you weren't interested in the truth, I'm sure. The bottom line is that when we started out, we didn't have a burning desire to build a software company. What we had was a burning desire for the internet to be fixed. And it just so turned out that this was the pathway to it. So that was right out at the very outset. And so we're a group that is very much faith-based. We believe that you connect with people to a degree that are like-minded in terms of worldview, but at the same time challenge you every day, like where you really mix the very aggressive academic environment where you can challenge each other's ideas and philosophical perspectives. But at the end of the day, you want to be aligned with people who think in terms of freedom, who are oriented towards how do we distribute, how do we decentralize the internet and avoid the possibility of centralization? Because in the end, as much as social values are really good to have, we felt that when it came to internet and technologies, we needed push towards decentralization versus centralization. So anybody that would join the team, it was really important that we were aligned at that philosophical level. And then we could disagree and argue about everything else below that. So that's how we ended up with initially a PhD from a local university. He happened to be in a Bible study with me, and we were just chatting together one evening, and I was telling him what I felt compelled to build, but didn't have the resources. And he was telling me that his contract at the university research was not being renewed. I said, we need to talk. And so that is literally how we connected. And he ended up becoming our primary C++ developer. And to this day, we could not have done that without his area of expertise. He literally will agonize over recursion of a DNS tree just to make sure it's the most optimal method. Like, he gets so incredibly granular when it comes to performance. And that's why to this day we benefit from, if you were to do a DNS benchmark, we're always excited to do one at each revision, because being ranked at the top in terms of just the sheer speed of DNS response is important to him and important to us. And so that culture was easy for us to continue when the folks right at the outset were that purposeful about making sure every fundamental step is just right. And some software developers really thrive on having very serious deadlines, right? And whether you take the agile methodology or a waterfall methodology doing project management, there's always this element of you've got a deadline. And we felt like that was certainly not in the first 5 years. We could never operate under any kind of deadlines. What drove us is to get everything absolutely perfect, and then we could take the next step. Today, we'll operate much more on business principles. You need a feature, you need it by then. There's a healthy kind of pressure there. But back then, it was not about any deadline. It was just about getting it right.
Let's talk about business. You mentioned business. It's great to build great technology. It's great to build everything like work like a Swiss clock. But you, as you mentioned, you need to have money. What did you do with customers? So you're techy by nature. How did you switch your hat to become a salesperson and then go sell this amazingly, perfectly well working technology?
Before I started our IT company with John, we were both employed at a retail shop in Canada called Future Shop. They're no longer around, but they were bought out by Best Buy. And one of the training elements of Future Shop that really stuck with me was that your passion comes through with product knowledge. The way to sell, if you're not an actual salesperson, meaning the way to sell if you don't have the gift for the gab, or you're not necessarily the social guy who makes everything super fun and people just want to hang with you, or if you're an introvert, the way to get to proper sales is to focus on product knowledge. Because what ends up happening is your real serious detect the BS very quickly, but they'll detect truth just as quickly. So if you have serious, deep, and wide product knowledge, your potential buyers will absolutely want to do business with you. Now, if you combine that with relationship, and then you have product knowledge and relationship, you know what you now have? You have tremendous amount of grace and forgiveness that comes as a result of that. So the first folks that would join and use our product, first of all, it was free of charge, but it really exposed them with services failing. And as we were learning, oh, we hadn't thought of that. Oh, we hadn't thought of that. So our maturation literally was driven by early adopters that believed in what we believed in. And some of those were Canadian Tire stores. And I can talk about that freely today. But Canadian Tire operates as a network of independent dealers. It's a very good feel-good story of entrepreneurialism in Canada. And so each individual store dealer, each store owner would then choose what technology to use for their little network segment. There's one network segment in a store, that's the dealer network. And then so we ended up getting a number of those. And again, we did some more learning. And so we just kept on growing by having real life applications. But again, the passion, the product knowledge, and the relationship combined with what was found, we quickly solved it. And so this is how we ended up developing very rapid iteration and making sure that we don't reintroduce old bugs. So then going down the continuous integration or CI route to make sure that each time we launch a new feature, it needs to go through all these tests. And then we have multiple channels from snapshot release or pre-snapshot, and then snapshot, then rapid release, which then becomes publicly available. And finally, scheduled release after a few weeks of it running globally at thousands of endpoints without knowing of any new problem. Then the schedule release comes out. And then if clients use best practices, that also auto upgrades within the week. And so that's a very fast communication of our evergreen cycle of making sure that product is patched. So I don't know if that
No,
the
this
process of switching to sales came out of necessity and out of passion, not even so much about necessity about as it was about anybody I had a relationship with that understood that we knew our craft just wanted it. So we literally had to hold back people that wanted it.
I have multiple ways of my mind working, so we'll take one by one. First of all, there's this idea like chicken and the egg. The customer's asking for a feature. You can tell them, yeah, we have the feature. Don't worry. And you going and developing. Sounds like not somebody like you. And then the other one, no, we don't have it, but if you want to buy it, we'll develop it for you. What's your approach?
That's a very good question. Because our birth wasn't about being a software company, but providing the solution, we always step back and say, is that ours to do or is that someone else? For example, I don't see us ever becoming developing software to be a SIM, but it's really important for us to make it easy for you, if you use Rapid7 or Graylog or Splunk or whatever, that it becomes easier for you to ingest all of this data into your existing SIM. So if something already exists out there, then it makes sense for us to just work with it, right? As opposed to building it ourselves. A very good example lately is a DOQ, right? We went from legacy DNS to DOT to DOH, and now DOQ, which is just DOH, but over quick, right? Or over UDP only. As an aside from that, we've
Now we're geeking out to technology, going very
oh
deep
yeah,
into
no.
this.
But to use the example there is, are we going to build DOQ ourselves, or is now the time to implement a proxy that handles that on our behalf, right? So there's a good example where it didn't make sense for us to build that in, but to do that as a separate layer. But then when it came time to making sure that it does everything it needs to do, we would consider other abstractions, but then eventually went back the monolithic path. There needs to be one piece of software that does everything that it needs to do, no more. And then we took the same approach about what do you do in the cloud versus what do you do with the on-prem software. You do everything on-prem that should be on-prem. So you let your philosophy drive your decision rather than technology or someone's desire. So if we abstract back to what is the philosophical principle behind a request, then that's where we start the answer to go down that path. Yeah.
I'm going to come back to more business part. You described about your passion to the product and why people buy from you. But in one point, you need to grow, hire other salespeople, and trust them they're going to sell you baby in the same way you will sell it. What
Right.
did you do then? How did you teach these people to actually make sure they're on the same level as you, at least?
That's not an easy transition to make. And I would say that the vast majority of companies that don't make it, that have a really good concept and a really good idea, that's probably at the point that they fail, right? Fortunately for me, I had a friend who was a filmmaker and was really a masterful storyteller, and initially hired him to actually build me some very short videos that would talk about concepts in a way that were easily consumed. This is before DOH. This is before, we're talking like 7, 8 years ago now, when we first started the need for storytelling, because I needed, if the storytelling was done properly to a buyer, then that would mean that same storytelling would suffice for additional team members as well as a starting point, right? And so that's what we started with. And Francois became our chief operating officer. After he did this for a while, he didn't come from a technology background, but what he recognized after doing a series of these videos, he realized that, wait a minute, there's a real consequential value for a business of any size. And that's when he became part of the team. And so if I didn't have a resource like that for the storytelling that then becomes a core essence of the marketing, then we'd be stuck with an amazing product that the world doesn't know about. And I would say we're still at the very early stages of making that switch. And so I'm no expert, but we're navigating that right now.
Are you using him and the storytelling to teach new people to sell the product, I'm guessing?
Yes. Yeah,
Right.
and the easiest way to do that is to do storytelling on the consequences of technology. Because if we were to describe how an internal combustion engine works to a would-be fossil fuel car buyer, they would have no interest at all. But if you tell them that they can go down the highway at 100 kilometers an hour and meet their family that's 2 hours away, that would have been 2 days away in the early days, then the consequence they can easily identify with. And so we just took the same approach to say, well, if you are able to operate a computer in a business environment that is otherwise very targeted through continuous phishing and malware attempts, and you can now have the staff have peace of mind without going down the path of this continuous security awareness training, there's value to that. But we had gotten to the point as the industry where we rely too much on SAT and not enough on proper protection that was, truly proactive. So if you can apply this truly proactive technology, now you can be at peace that your chief financial officer can operate at extremely low risk. There's never zero risk, but what if you go from low risk to extremely low risk? That's worth buying without understanding the technology. And so that focus on the benefits and the consequences and having everybody understand that is what our team focuses on now.
Let me ask you a different question about technology. When you started the company, you had a vision in mind. Did the vision really changed, or it's the same vision from the beginning? Another question is going to be aligned. Was there a moment, like an aha moment, when the customer told you, "Oh my God, this is exactly what I needed," that you knew, okay, I'm on the right path?
Yes, both of those we have. I can answer the first one that our vision from the beginning, when it was just me and Dr. Tom walking around that soccer field, it was very clear that we needed to design this with 1 billion routers utilizing this software globally. And that vision has never changed. It's still exactly the same. And our mission has been clarified in our process of growing and getting the future landscape more and more clear. And then our mission is very simple. We protect people. And a dependency on that is for those that choose to be protected. So it's still an opt-in, but definitively it's people and not companies and not countries. It happens that to protect people, the company needs to be protected. But if a nation state comes to us and says, we want to have your product at the edge of our network, the answer is no, that's not where it belongs. It belongs at the edge of the client's network, not at the edge of a country's network. And so that has not changed. Our vision has remained exactly the same.
Was there an aha moment when the customer actually told you, "Oh my God, this is so great," and you knew, like, validation that what you're building is correct?
Yes, absolutely. For us, the aha moment was the point at which a client said, I have tried solutions in the past and stopped doing whitelisting or allow listing because of the frustration. The aha moment came for us when we had a large group of users on a whitelist or allow list, as we call it nowadays, without them knowing it, meaning that there was no friction. There was no resource unavailable that they needed. Everything worked. And yet, if they got a phishing link that was just newly minted with Acme certificate moments ago, and so it's not in anybody's blacklist or block list yet, they were still protected because it was being whitelisted in real time using the best of machine learning, AI, all of those kinds of things all brought together, just all behind the scenes, because from an endpoint's point of view, you want to be able to go only to destinations that have presence of positive reputation. But the aha moment was all my staff can do all their work. There's no friction. And yet we're being whitelisted.
So we spoke a lot about good stuff. We spoke about building. You also mentioned you have quite a big family. Is there actually a work-life balance? Can you actually achieve it when you're building a company and you're selling and you're building at the same time?
No, of course not. I believe that there's an essential balance that you need to, from time to time, make sure that you switch off work. Yes, there is. And did I do it right? No, I didn't do it right. There were times when I waited way too long and my family paid the price because dad wasn't there, the husband wasn't there. I'm trying to make it right now, trying to be more on purpose. When you start a company, the person that is on PagerDuty is the founder, and that can happen for 10 years. And for me, it was literally 10 years of not having the peace of mind of being able to shut my phone off at night, because if something was broken, I needed to be the first to know. When people don't have access to the internet because the plumbing is broken, that's bad news. And the only way to address that is to be fast at being responsive. And the only way I knew how to do that was that the buck stopped with me. So it wasn't actually until this year that I
Oh,
finally got to the stage where I can go to bed and I can tell my wife that there's no way my phone's going to ring at night because it's off.
so let's switch and talk about some, I call the dark side. This is the place where we talk about stuff that didn't work as you expected, where maybe big failures to learn from them. Of course, don't mention any confidential information, but maybe some customer horror stories or technology horror stories that you can share. That I hope was a lesson learned from you as well.
Yes, I can tell you some horror stories about our technology or about even growing as a company. When we sign up our first enterprise client that ended up utilizing our product in a way that we hadn't thoroughly used before, we suddenly noticed a massive spike in CPU consumption that we hadn't considered. And so what it did is it brought the whole enterprise network to its knees. So the learning from that was really quite significant. Not only was that the trigger for us doing smart rollout, and the term smart rollout is what we now use as a way of deploying a zero trust connectivity solution in many more, but many smaller stages that are very strategic, so that at any point in time, you're not creating a disruption. And it reminds me kind of the, I don't know if you're familiar with the author Dan Ariely. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But he wrote a book called Predictably Irrational.
No, I'll Google it later,
You might be interested. I'll give you an unfair shortened version of his basic
please.
premise. He had very severe burns on his face, on his body, and ended up in the hospital. And so daily, the nurses would come by, maybe it was more than once a day, and remove the bandages and apply new bandages for a period of time. That process of the bandage removal was done like very fast. And Dan's request to the nurses was, could you not do it more slowly so that it's not as painful? And they wouldn't do it because their response to him was, actually, we found this is better. So what happened after that was Dan, in his inquisitive mind and wanting to really measure pain, after he got out of the hospital, he went and did an absolute deep dive on whether it's better to go slow and painful or fast and very painful. His conclusion was quite interesting. The only reason that the standard in healthcare was to rip off the band-aid fast, it was better for the nurse, because the nurse had to endure less of the emotional expression of the patient. It turned out that for the patient, a slow, methodical one was way better, just in terms of cumulatively measuring the pain. And he did this very well. And out of that came this whole Predictably Irrational book. The entire book is.
Interesting.
And this is the application that I knew we needed here as well. And so now our enterprise deployments are the slow, methodical ones, right? You have just enough pain that you can sustain it, but you need to get to the point where the bandage is off. If you believe that zero trust is the way to go, where egress control, exfiltration control needs to be stopped so that the attack chain can be disrupted, then to get there is not going to be completely pain-free, but we can do it in a very predictable, slow way. And that is what we learned out of that.
Of the analogy, very, very good explanation. David, thank you very much. It was amazing. Half an hour. The time flew so fast. I have a feeling we can talk a lot about technology and life as well. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Please join us for the next episode as well. Thank you.